So I'm really pleased to say that today we have Christelle Govender with us. Now, Christelle is a South African business analyst with over 9 years experience in the IT profession. Starting off as a quality analyst, she worked her way up towards the role of a business analyst. She's passionate about sharing, growing and building others up. She has experience as a mentor, an author and a public speaker. And she's going to be talking to us today about public speaking, about stakeholders, I should say. So with a presentation entitled Slipping Through My Fingers, the stakeholder that got away. Christelle, over to you.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and welcome everybody from all the different corners of the world. I'm very excited to be sharing this topic with you today. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. And I think we're ready to go. So yes, today's topic is entitled Slipping Through My Fingers, the stakeholder that got away. Now, if any of you are an ABBA fan, like I am, and I'm unashamed of it, you would know that this title is very similar to the song Slipping Through My Fingers. And the lyrics go like this: slipping through my fingers all the time. I try to capture every minute, the feeling in it. Slipping through my fingers all the time. Do I really see what's in her mind? Each time I'm close to knowing, she keeps on growing, slipping through my fingers all the time. You may wonder what that has to do with being a business analyst, but I assure you we will unpack that as we go through today's session. So just to go over what we're going to cover today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me because obviously we're all in different parts of the world. And I think it's important to just get to know each other a little bit. I'm going to give you some background into this topic and why it's close to my heart. And then you will notice a theme of music. So judging from what I'm wearing today, you can tell that I'm passionate about football and I am a Manchester United supporter. And even if we lost the match on Sunday, I would still be wearing this jersey very proudly. And I'm also passionate about music. So every topic that we're going to be covering has a title related to a song or a lyric in a rather popular music track. So we're going to be covering Will the Real Stakeholder Please Stand Up, Be Human Again, We Don't Talk Anymore, Level Up, and then we'll be going to our conclusion. So just a little bit about me. Very recently, that number increased from 9 to 10. As in this month, it increased. So yes, I have 10 years of experience in the IT environment, and I've been a business analyst for just around 6 years now. I'm very passionate about mentorship and growth because I transitioned into this role because of a mentor and because someone was invested in growing another person. So I believe it's a continuous cycle. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. This particular topic is like an internal retrospective. Now, I know that business analysts may not particularly like the term retrospective, but we all know and we can agree that a retrospective has value. It's important to pause and look back so that we can assess how far we've truly come and make provision to make sure certain things that were uncomfortable don't happen again. So through this talk, I'm going to be sharing with you my example of failure. It is very difficult to open up and say, I failed as a business analyst. No one wants that on their resume. No one wants to put that on their LinkedIn. No one wants to say, I couldn't do a particular part of my job that is expected of me. We all have a business analyst toolkit. And within that toolkit, maybe you're really good at writing user stories, at doing wireframes, mockups, maybe you're really good at doing process flows, maybe your strength is more on the data side. But whatever our strengths are, most business analysts are expected to be good, if not great, at stakeholder management. After all, who are you crossing the finish line for? Whose user needs or services are you, whose user needs are you providing services or software for, or whatever the case may be? So this internal retrospective is quite painful. It's like ripping off the proverbial Band-Aid and exposing a wound of failure, my own personal failure. But I hope that you will see through this vulnerability and see what you can also draw from this experience. Now, we're going to be talking about managing your stakeholder in a remote setting. Now, whether you work in a hybrid setting, whether you've gone back to the office, or whether you're fully remote, no one can deny that post-March 2020, the way we did work changed completely. The way our teams were set up changed completely. Our lives changed completely. And I've just got snippets of a few articles. And the great thing is that these articles and the links are going to be available at the end. So if you don't get to scan them now, don't worry. But these are links from different articles that talk about statistics related to remote working and the shift that has happened globally across job profiles with the introduction of remote working or hybrid settings. So if we look at the first one, 10% of online job searches in September mentioned remote work, a nearly six-fold increase relative to September 2019, before the COVID pandemic. So there's an increase. When people look for jobs, they type in remote or hybrid. And then these statistics, which are really interesting, 66% of respondents said that they want to work flexibly when the pandemic is over. 30% would consider looking for another job if they were required to return to the office full-time. 30% is a lot of people. 64% of respondents said that they were more productive with a flexible work schedule. And you can go on, there's many other statistics. There's lots of articles online about how this shift in how we view employment has changed. I mean, people now have the flexibility of being able to work for a company in a completely different time zone, in a completely different currency. It's opened up doors that were previously shut or limited to a certain group of people. And while this is great and remote working comes with its pros and cons, it's changed a very specific part of being a business analyst. Now, I've got some stats that are specific to South Africa, but these are really interesting. 82% of people have adopted flexible working hours, with a lot of them actually approaching their managers and teams and saying, can we please work from home? 63% said that working remotely has increased their productivity, and 71% said that flexible working will be more important than before COVID. So that's what they're looking for in jobs, which means whatever team you're working with, whatever stakeholder you're working with, the likelihood of at least one person in your team working from home is a very big reality, which means we as business analysts need to adapt our skill set. When COVID happened, everyone was calling it the new normal. This is how we're going to do work. But we've slowly come out of, touch wood, the seriousness of COVID. People are not wearing masks. There's been mass vaccination drives. Countries have opened their borders. So we're regaining some degree of pre-2020 of what our lives were. But there's this new normal that's around us, specifically with how we work. And that means that we have to adapt so that we can manage or better manage our stakeholder relationships. Now back to my lyrics. Slipping through my fingers all the time, I try to capture every minute, the feeling in it. Slipping through my fingers all the time. Do I really see what's on her mind? Each time I'm close to knowing, she keeps on growing, slipping through my fingers. So I'm going to start my presentation with a once upon a time. We all love stories. So once upon a time, I, as a business analyst, began working for a company that was a fully remote company. We had no physical offices, which means there was never going to be a time when we say, come into the office on a Wednesday, because there was no physical office. It was fully remote. People were based in India, in South Africa, in the UK, in Australia, in all parts of the world. And when I joined this team, I was new to the company, new to the team, new to the role of a senior business analyst, and it was a lot going on. So obviously, when I jump into the team, the first thing I want to know is, who are my stakeholders? And every time I thought I was close to knowing, they slipped through my fingers. Every time I thought I was close to knowing what they actually wanted us to deliver, in terms of the software for the user needs, or even knowing who the user was. It slipped through my fingers. Now, I'm not going to tell you how that story ended until the end of the presentation. And consider that some sort of clickbait to make sure you stay interested until the end of the presentation. So again, like I said, I'm going to be sharing my experience and why this is something that we need to deeply consider as business analysts. Have you ever felt defeated when you're trying to create your stakeholder relationship? You can tell I like sports because you have the cricket reference. Did you ever feel like you were knocked for a six? Well, I want you to know that you're not alone. This happens to just about any professional in any role, but also to business analysts, even business analysts who have been in the role for 10 to 15 years and even longer. So like I said, I'm going to be sharing that I made a mistake, but mistakes help us learn. You know, when kids make a mistake, as parents, not that I'm a parent, but I've seen my mom do this with my sibling and I've seen other parents do it, where they're very quick to encourage their child that mistakes or failure is a stepping stone to success. Like, it's okay, it's not the end of the world. You'll learn and you'll grow. If only we could have that same mindset for ourselves, even professionally. If only we could be that encouraging to ourselves. So we're going to look at our first topic. Will the real stakeholder please stand up? Similar to the Eminem song. So when I got into the new team, this will seem like such a duh thing to do. But it was very difficult in a remote setting to ask who the stakeholder is. So picture this, you join stand up in the morning, it's 9 a.m. and everybody dives right in. They're sharing a Miro board, a Jira board, Azure DevOps, whatever they're using to track their work. They're sharing some sort of board and everyone's giving their updates and you're so confused. Remember, the team is pressed for time. Everyone's working remotely. They're probably not purposely being mean and forgetting to welcome you. They're probably just trying to get as much done in that 15-minute stand-up. But there you are, battling to figure out what's going on. It's not that easy to put your hand up either on Zoom or Teams and say, sorry, can somebody please help me understand what's going on? I recently started at a new company, and on my first day, it was very easy to walk up to people's desks and stick my hand out and say, hi, I'm the new BA, and I'm working in this team. And everyone was very receptive. That's not so easy in a remote world, because now you can't go over to someone's desk and say, hi, I'm the new BA. I'm going to be working with you on this project. And, read a little name tag above their desk, figure out which team they're in based on where they're sitting. Those cues that we took for granted are no longer there, which means we need to be bold enough to raise our hand and say, somebody please bring me up to speed, because I can't add value unless I know what's going on. Now, while it seems like that's the most obvious thing to do, in a remote setting, it's very easy to remain muted and keep your camera off and fade away into the silence. The meeting ends, and after 15 minutes, you're left wondering, what am I supposed to be working on? Who are these people? I don't know who to contact if I have a question. And everyone's so busy, let me not bug them, And then the first day goes and the second day goes. And before long, you're in sprint planning and you have no idea what you're supposed to be working on. So the very first thing I advise people to do, whether it's in a remote setting or in a hybrid setting, is the most obvious thing you would do on the first day of the job, is introduce yourself and find out who your team is. Be curious. Don't be afraid to ask people questions. Don't be afraid to familiarize yourself with your surroundings. Ask people, sorry, you shared that document on Teams. Where can I find it? Or you presented from this board. Can I have access to it? I need to go through a few things. Don't be afraid to use the facilities, the chat facilities that you have, or whatever technology your team is using for you to speak to one another. Ask questions, because the longer you take to ask those questions, the more difficult it gets to actually add value that a business analyst can add if they know who is who. And then the next thing is keep a record. Now, in a remote working or hybrid setting, you'll be surprised how often roles change. Do you remember back in the day when everyone was in the office and suddenly you would see someone pack up their desk and leave? You would know that that person either got a new job or they're moving to another team, and you would know that there was a change in the structure. That now if I wanted to speak to Mr. X from finance, Mr. X is no longer there. I need to speak to Miss Y. You would know because you were in the office and you would see cars missing from the parking lot and empty desks. It's not the same case in a virtual world. If anything, remote working and hybrid working has allowed people much more opportunity to change jobs much quicker. Now, whether that's within the organization or completely out of the organization, the reality is job turnover is at an all-time high in comparison to pre-2020. So if you do not keep a record, a stakeholder map, it'll be very difficult to keep track of who's who in which project that you're working on. Because let's be real, no BA works in that blue sky scenario where you have just one team, one product owner, and one project manager that you're working with. Because even if you are, the likelihood that you're working on multiple projects within that space is very high, which means you're touching multiple teams, speaking to multiple people. Keep a record, whether it's on Confluence, whether you have a good old-fashioned Excel on SharePoint, whatever works for you. If you have to write a sticky note and stick it next to your desk, do what works for you. But keep a record of who the people are and keep a record of their roles. I made the mistake of once just writing people's names and not including their role. So when they changed or when they moved on to another position, I was like, I'm looking for Rose. I didn't even know the role that she had. And it seemed like such an obvious thing to do. But it becomes increasingly difficult in a hybrid or remote setting. And when you are keeping a record, it's important to know the level of invested interest in what you're working on. You have an inner circle, an outer circle, you have high priority stakeholders, lower priority stakeholders, highly interested, not so interested. So prioritize them. And you can only prioritize them if you know who they are and if you keep a record of them. Because one of the things that I know BAs struggle with is being put on multiple projects, and you have to find out, okay, which project is the priority, which needs to be focused on first. It's hard to have that discussion if you don't know who your stakeholders are. Because in the office setting, you see everyone running around, you see the meetings, you see the execs in the boardroom, and you know project X is of high priority. That's not happening in the remote setting. You're in your home chilling, your dog is barking in the backyard. You don't know which project is actually high priority. So to recap, you have to be curious, keep a record, and prioritize, which leads me to the last one, is understanding. One of the mistakes that I made was diving straight into understanding. I just wanted to know how my stakeholders felt about the project and how they felt about me being on the project. I sort of just wanted to gain their confidence. But unless you are that person who's curious, you are that person who's keeping a record, and you are able to prioritize your stakeholders, it's hard to get them to buy into the fact that you can add value to the project. Because you're just an icon, a little tile on a Zoom meeting or on a Teams meeting. They're not seeing you in the office. They're not seeing you next to your desk from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, diligently working away. So if you're not raising your hand in a Teams call or commenting on whatever platform you're using to have chats on a regular basis, you basically look invisible to the team and they don't know what you're working on. Even if you're working diligently for all 8 hours that you're meant to be at work, there's an increased need for visibility in the remote or hybrid setting. So it's important, before you ask the real stakeholder to stand up, you have to actually be curious, keep a record, and prioritize, and then understand. The next one that we're going to go to is We Don't Talk Anymore. So this is a song by Charlie Puth and Selena Gomez. So we just found out who our stakeholder is, but now we're being accused of not talking anymore. And that kind of touches on the visibility that I mentioned. George Bernard Shaw has one of my favorite quotes related to communication. And he says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Now, pre-COVID, when we used to have stand-up, it was a literal stand-up. Everyone stood up at their desk, and there were some teams that had a physical whiteboard, and we had actual post-its that we would move along. And then in some instances, someone would just share their screen and refer back to whatever sort of board you were using to track your work. But everybody knew what you were working on. In a remote setting, sometimes you think that, well, I moved the ticket from in progress to done. Surely that's enough communication that the task is done. Unfortunately, it isn't. Assuming that everyone has seen your update is not enough. When I first went into the fully remote world, my project manager said to me on my first day, learn to over-communicate. And it sounded like such a burden. So I have to send an email, I have to send a message on Teams, I have to physically move tickets across the board, I have to update Confluence, I have to do like 6 things just for people to know that I did my task. It takes longer for me to update people on my task than to actually complete my task. But this is how it is in a remote world, in a hybrid world. People need over communication because they're inundated with communication. So you need more communication so they don't miss your communication. It's an infinite cycle. It's crazy, but it's necessary. So the biggest thing with stakeholder management is a stakeholder feeling that they're not being communicated to. Now, that stems from not knowing how your stakeholder wants to be communicated to. So on our very first topic, we spoke about who our stakeholders are. Now, we know there's some stakeholders who prefer email. Some stakeholders are cool with you just sending them an instant message to say, hi, Bob, XYZ, thanks, thumbs up emoji. Some stakeholders are cool with that. Other stakeholders want you to call them up and say, hi, Bob, just a heads up, this task is currently in testing. They're happy with that. And some stakeholders are happy with just moving the ticket across the board to that. But you will only know that if you know who your stakeholders are. If you took the time to ask the question, see, pre-COVID, pre-working remotely and the hybrid setting, you could just go over to someone's desk and say, hi, Bob, so I'm working on this project. How would you like me to send you updates? Simple. Not so simple in a hybrid or remote world. You have to ask the questions. And in your stakeholder map, where you're keeping a record of who your stakeholders are, add how they like to be communicated to. Because the worst thing ever is to assume that your stakeholder knows what's going on when they don't. And that just depreciates trust. And as that trust depreciates over time, it becomes increasingly difficult for a stakeholder to believe that you can actually add value to this project. So like I said, as we go through this, I'll be sharing parts of my journey. The project that I was working on in this fully remote setting did not previously have a BA. So I was already fighting the assumption that the team could function fully well without the presence of a business analyst. So on a daily basis, I had to reassure the team, as well as the product owners and project managers, that they did in fact need the value of the role of a business analyst. But if you're not communicating to them well, you're just adding to their thoughts that they do not need this role. And that problem can occur in any setting. So you have to consider how you communicate and who you communicate and how often you communicate to them. Which leads me to my next point, around the clock. Now, the lyrics of the song is very interesting. It goes 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're going to rock around the clock tonight. Now, remote working with teams across the world has its own dramas. So right now in South Africa, it's 3 minutes to 9. Most people are in bed now, but it's still early in the UK. It's, you guys have just had supper and this is quite a relaxing time. Don't even get me started on what time it's probably in the USA, and I think India is 3.5 hours ahead of me. So yeah, it's pretty late in India right now. So when you're working remotely, one of the most important things to consider is what time it is with the people that you are communicating to. One of my favorite features in Outlook is when you're typing an email and Outlook says, do you want to consider sending this email during business hours? Or when you're typing to someone on Slack and it says, it's now 8 p.m. for John. So you know not to expect an answer until the next morning. It's important for yourself as a business analyst to let people know what time zone you're working in, what times you work in, and communicate the times that you expected to be out of the office. Everyone has kids, everyone has doctor's appointments or things that they need to do. Be clear on your calendar about when you're available and when you're not available. And be the change you want to see in the world. If you're trying to communicate with someone and their calendar just has blocks that say tentative, it is the most frustrating thing to try and set up a meeting with that person. Remote working can be a pleasure if people use the tools that were created to elaborate and collaborate together. Time zones do not have to be a hindrance. We have Confluence, we have Slack, we have Google Docs, Microsoft Teams. I remember once we were in a meeting and someone said, a meeting without food should be an email. And that quote always stuck with me because when we would meet in physical offices, there would always be water or biscuits or something in the meeting room. But it's important to remember that not every email can be a meeting and not every meeting can be an email. Know what to communicate on what platform. Have you ever opened an email and it's like 50 trails long and you have to get that one person that replies, can someone please summarize what's going on here? Because no one actually goes to the bottom of the email and reads the first mail trail that started it off. And all like there's 10 responses that says adding Bob, adding Diane, adding this person. It is like 5 to 10 mail trails of that. So it's important to know what to communicate on which platform. If something goes past the 4th mail trail, maybe consider setting up a meeting, getting the relevant people together. But it's important to use the tools that we have and know when your stakeholders are available. When's the best time to have a meeting if your product owner is in India and your project manager is in the UK, your testers are in South Africa, and your developers are in Poland? What's the time period during the day, which is the best time to have meetings to allow you as a team to collaborate together? And then you know that the hours before that and the hours after that is when we will actually put our head down and do work. So you will only know that by asking those questions. When I joined my remote team, we had an Excel doc that actually showed people's available times in one single time zone, because most of the people were in the UK, but it showed what time it would be in South Africa as well, or in India, so that people knew when to communicate with us. We also made use of the features on Slack, on Microsoft Teams to show our availability. It's important to use that when collaborating and elaborating with your team. This is my favorite part of this entire conversation, and it's to be human again. And this song is from a Disney classic, Beauty and the Beast. I'm giving away my age here. You can tell that I was born in the 90s. But this is one of my favorite Disney movies. And if you're not too familiar with the story of the Beauty and the Beast was a king and a prince rather, and he ended up being, well, the Beast. And every human that was within his castle ended up being objects within a house. So you had Mrs. Potts and Chip, who was a cup, and the clock and the candlestick, and they all just wanted to be human again. And the reason I added this to the talk is because when you're working remotely, it's very easy to forget that on the other side of the line is an actual person, is a person who has family, who gets the cold just like you, a person who needs to eat, a person who needs to go to the bathroom. You know, when you've had 8 hours of back-to-back meeting and someone couldn't go to the bathroom, it's a really inhumane thing to do. But somehow remote working has caused us to lose our human touch. So how do we regain it in the hybrid or remote world? Well, it's this quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Now, of the 70 attendees that have joined this webinar and the many others that will watch it online, without me even starting my conversation with you today, you already knew that I was a soccer fanatic and that the football team of choice was Manchester United, without us even starting a conversation. Imagine if we were in a meeting right now, and we were meeting for the first time and we're going to work on a project together. How many of you Liverpool supporters would take a dig at me? Probably a lot. How many United supporters would go, hey, how cool was the match on Sunday? It's an instant conversation starter. We have to be more deliberate about communication in a remote world. One project manager that I worked with kept a guitar next to him. And in meetings, people would constantly ask him, if they were seeing him for the first time, do you actually play guitar? And he'd say, no, I just fool around with it, I'm trying. And eventually one day he said to me, Christelle, I just keep this here as a conversation starter. Because when people meet you for the first time, no one actually wants to say, hey, so what do you like? What did you do this weekend? You know those Monday conversations we used to have at the office, or those Friday ones where we would ask our team, so what you getting up to this weekend? And it was just a way to bond with the people around you, to remember that you're working in a team of, well, humans and not robots or artificial intelligence. You're working with actual people. But in a remote world, it's very easy to lose that touch. We grow very intolerant of people, but then we want to work together as a team. Well, how do we do that? We have to be deliberate about our communication. Small talk truly does lead to a big connection in the remote working world. By wearing just a football jersey, I'm already able to have a conversation with someone. The first time I presented this in a remote, like in a webinar format, I wore a complete Indian traditional outfit. It was an instant conversation starter with everyone. They were like, is it a special prayer day? Is it a holiday? But people were able to come out of their shell and ask a question. The most horrible thing is to have that awkward silence in a call where, you join and everyone just keeps quiet and no one wants to speak. And if that was in a meeting room, pre-COVID, and the person who's hosting the meeting is late, everyone in the meeting room would just chat, even if it was something as insignificant as the aircon is really high in this room, It's quite cold in this meeting room. But it was an instant way to start a conversation, which means in a remote setting, we have to be more deliberate about it. So what if this painting behind me was Darth Vader? Pretty sure all the Star Wars fans would be, hey, that's super cool. I had a project manager that I worked with that had shelves behind him, and it had all these Legos and figurines, Marvel, Harry Potter, DC, all of these amazing things. And we would join meetings and people would instantly say, hey, that's a really cool background. It just broke the ice immediately. So it doesn't mean that you have to be an extrovert. You could be an introvert and just wear a t-shirt that has a really exciting statement, or a Tom and Jerry picture. It doesn't need to be shock everybody and wear a three-piece suit, because everyone working from home is wearing their jammies anyway, and we know it. So use whatever you can, be creative about it. I know teams that have bring your pet to work day, and you'll see people join meetings and they're cuddling their cute little dog or their big dog or whatever it is, but just be human again. Be deliberate about creating bonds with your people. See those water cooler chats that we used to have when we pass someone in the corridor is not going to happen in a hybrid and remote setting, which means we need to create those water cooler moments. Because even if that person is not your stakeholder right now, they could be your stakeholder in another project, in a future project. Try and create those relationships now. Small talk in a remote setting does lead to a big connection. Now, I'm not saying be insincere about your conversation. That's the total opposite. People can tell if you're being insincere, especially in a remote setting, because people can get so tired of it. When someone says, have you ever seen someone have the status up on Teams or Slack that says, no hello? Because you get someone that says, hello, next message, how are you doing? Next message. I was wondering if you could help me. The next message actually contains what they needed help with. Some people get really annoyed with that. But again, you would only know if you know who your stakeholders are. You would only know how to create bonds with them if you know who they are. This truly is a soft skill. And the technical aspects of our job will become increasingly more difficult to do if we do not focus on these soft skills. Now, coming back to the insincerity of sometimes the small talk, energy, not time, is the fundamental currency of high performance. So I'm not saying set up 8 15-minute chats with people on your calendar just to have it full, just to make it seem like you're trying to create bonds. Because if your energy is not in it, into actually trying to create a relationship with your stakeholder, it's just going to fizzle away. It's just a waste of time. It's the energy that you put in. So a full calendar is not a measurement of success, because 90% of the time, that person has to do the actual work after hours. It's not a measurement of success. So you would rather have one 10-minute catch up with someone once a week and let it be a solid 10-minute catch up where you really get to know the person. You really focus on building that stakeholder relationship rather than having multiple meetings and not putting your true energy into it. The next song that we're going to be looking at is Level Up, a song by Sierra. This theme of Level Up is incidentally the IIBA theme for South Africa for this year, to level up as business analysts. So how would we do that in a remote setting world? Well, here's something that not many people may like, but we have to be intentional about being organized. And that means keeping our calendars neat and tidy. The worst thing is to try and set up a meeting with someone and their calendar is a mess. But we're very quick to pick on that, but have we ever noticed our calendars as business analysts? There's a lot of times we added into meetings that we don't need to really be in. There's a lot of times that we join meetings and we haven't got the screens ready to share, or we're still trying to, get things going in the meeting. A 15-minute meeting in a remote setting world is a lot less forgiving than a half-an-hour meeting in a full office setting. Everyone's on high speed and they just want to get through things. So that means we have to be super organized. That means set time in the morning or in the afternoon, whichever is easier for you, and focus on your admin. That means updating your documentation, sending out an actual agenda for a meeting. No one should send out a meeting without an agenda, even if it's just a bullet list of the questions that you want to cover in that meeting. It will allow the attendees to prepare beforehand. Imagine getting to a meeting and the stakeholder has no idea what you're going to ask them. And you ask them 8 questions and they say to you, I'm going to have to get back to you. So now you need a follow-up meeting. Whereas if you set up the meeting and gave them an agenda, they could prepare some answers, if not all, beforehand and come to the meeting prepared. So make sure your meetings that you send out as a business analyst has an agenda. Again, a lot of times this sounds like such a duh thing to do. But in a remote working world, like I said, we're on high alert, we're on high speed, and sometimes we forget to do this. Another thing that I would advise is to try and avoid same-day meetings. It doesn't give attendees much time to prepare. Of course, there are instances where there's severe work that's prioritized and needs to be seen to at that very moment. And of course, that's an edge case. But in wherever possible, try to set up meetings for either the next day or 2 or 3 days later so people can actually prepare. So you can have documentation ready, so you could just fill in the blanks. Do it during the meeting. Share your screen and do it during the meeting. People can see where the information is being captured. And share recordings. Share links to documents. Make sure people have access to it. The worst thing is when you share a link in a meeting and everyone goes, I don't have access. Try and do those things beforehand. That extra 5 to 10 minutes of preparation is what makes things go more smoothly. We have to be more intentional about being organized. And that's the level up that's required, irrespective of how great our mock-ups and data flows and user flows look. If the people attending the meeting can't actually see it, it defeats the purpose. If they can't sign it off, defeats the purpose. So make sure that we're intentional about how we are organized as PAs. The key to organization is that very preparation, taking the time to actually prepare. So again, whether it's 15 minutes in the morning, half an hour after, towards the end of your day, make sure that you do that. It will save you in the long run. Now, this quote is very important to me because it's going to be a nice segue into the end of my story. Trust is a combination of competency, which is basically your skills, your capability and reliability, but also your character, your integrity and benevolence, just as a human being, as a person. You can be totally skilled for the job, but if you're lacking the soft skills to work remotely or work in a hybrid setting, or even in an office setting, it's very difficult to work as a team. My belief is that technical skills can be learned. Domains are different. I can be a super technical BA in a specific domain and then move to the fast moving consumer goods industry. And it's a different domain, which means I have to learn the technical skills or adapt it for that environment. But if you have the integrity and benevolence and soft skills as a BA, the ability to manage stakeholder relationships, you'll learn the technical skills. It will come along. So now to share my story of failure. I was put into a team where my project manager did not believe that I was able to add value to this project. And I struggled every day. I struggled with the very first point of being silent in meetings. Maybe I was waiting for someone to introduce me. Maybe I was waiting for someone to share with me the access to Confluence and to Jira. And it went on for a month before I had full access to anything, because everyone sort of assumed that I would ask for it. And I assumed that people would know that there's a new person in the team. This is so obvious, let's give them access to everything. And for that month, with all those assumptions, it just really made the stakeholder relationship strained, and it was very badly damaged. So every bit of work that I did was questioned. And it was difficult because I was failing. I didn't know what my stakeholders wanted. I went into meetings with the wrong people. I set up meetings and people would join it and say, well, I'm not in that team anymore. I've moved on. It's been 2 months. I'm in a new team. And I had no idea. Or people will come to the meeting and say, it's not me that's supposed to be here. It's so-and-so. And then that person was not available for the next 3 weeks because they were on holiday. So I couldn't get the information that I needed. And it just felt like one terrible mistake or decision after the other. Until one day my project manager had a meeting with me and said, you know what? You're failing as a business analyst. You're not adding the value that you're supposed to add. The stakeholders don't actually know how we're going to get the project across the finish line because they don't believe that you understand what they're trying to accomplish. Because I was having meetings with the wrong people. I was having meetings, but the team was not aware of the outcomes because I was not updating some sort of artifact so that they could refer back to say, oh, okay, she did actually have this conversation. It was only at that point that I realized how important communication was in a hybrid or remote setting, that I began over-communicating, which sounds like such an unnecessary activity, but it is so necessary. I went through this golden rule. If my meeting did not have some sort of artifact or some sort of deliverable that was going to come out of it, I would not have the meeting. So even if it was an update to one line on a Jira ticket, or one line on a business requirements doc, or one word on a workflow diagram, I would not have the meeting. And once that update was done, I would send it to the team on our instant chat messaging systems. I would send it on email. and I would make sure everyone was aware of it because I had to be visible. Because see, there was no office where people could see me physically getting up and walking to a meeting. Nobody knew what I was doing in my little corner of South Africa. I was working and I was trying really hard to get up to speed. But it's almost like the whole team was digging a trench in that side and I was on this side digging a trench. And I thought at some point it was going to join up with their trench, but it wasn't. Because managing a stakeholder in a remote setting is completely different to working in an office environment. Because if you were having a conversation with the wrong person in the office, it would be very easy to just get up from your chair and go to the next person and talk to them. In a remote working world, that person's calendar is already booked out for the next 3 days, which means you have a 3-day waiting period for you to update one document, where 4 people are waiting to sign it off. Do the math. That's a lot of time that's being wasted. So yes, I failed, but I learned. I learned by applying what I'm sharing with you today. I learned from my experience of messaging developers at 11 o'clock in the night on their time, in their time zone, and they were wondering, were they expected to respond to my message at that time? They were so confused. But you learn. A major part of becoming a business analyst for me was being a change agent, being able to drive change, being able to see where the vision was for the product or the service that we were working on, and being able to build that road to get us there. And in a remote working world, I see the end goal. I see this beautiful relationship between the business analyst and the stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, it's not just the users or the external parties. I'm talking about the testers within your team, the developers within your team, your own product manager or your product owner. I see this beautiful relationship that has been formed. But that road to getting there was so hazy and it was filled with rocks and debris. And as I went through this experience of failing, that road began to clear up. And while what I shared with you today may seem like some really obvious things to do, in a remote setting world, it has so much of value. In a hybrid setting world, it has so much of value. This soft skill is where I see business analysts needing to focus on. This soft skill, as well as many other soft skills, because where I see this career moving in the next couple of years is being able to drive change in any environment. We need to be able to see opportunities and adapt. And if we're constantly stuck in the old way of doing things, that's going to be very difficult. If we're like, if you're anything like the older folk that are in South Africa, there's this one line that they always use. They call it the glory days, the good old days. If we're constantly stuck in that mindset of the good old days, we're never going to experience the good present days or the good future days. It's always good to reflect, but there's a reason that the rearview mirror is smaller than the windscreen, because we need to move forward. And I believe that focusing on these soft skills is going to move us forward as a profession. So thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to share this experience, a very vulnerable experience. And I truly do hope everyone could learn something from it. There is a QR code on the screen right now. If you scan that, you'll be able to find a document that has links to all the articles that I referenced, the little snippets that were at the beginning of the presentation, and you can read through those articles and let us know your thoughts. So over to Adrian.
Wow, thank you. I mean, Christelle, I think I join everyone here in saying that was an absolutely phenomenal presentation. Just before we move on, there's a link in the chat which also goes with that QR code. So if you're attending live, you can look at the link in the chat. And I just want to pick up some of the comments on the chat before we move on. We've got lots of people saying thank you. We've got lots of thanks for sharing your experience. Amazing demonstration of a growth mindset. Lots of really nice. I can't even catch up with all of the all of the nice chats there. Definitely, I mean, this is the point, of course, where we would be giving a virtual round of applause. One way of giving a virtual round of applause in a virtual environment is to connect with speakers on LinkedIn. So I'm just now going to put Christelle's LinkedIn address in the chat. So it's a great way to stay in touch, to increase your network. My LinkedIn address is in there as well. So if you, if you'd like to connect, if we're not already connected, do feel free to do that. So I'm now we've got time for perhaps a couple of questions. Our first question is, what techniques do you use when doing elicitation with stakeholders when remote? Which is a really big and important question. So Christelle, elicitation in a remote environment.
So one of the tools I use is a Miro board, and I do something called a discovery. So I have a template where I ask a few basic questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And while my aim is not to fill everything in that specific meeting, it's to just get an outline of who is the final user, who are users along the way, what exactly are we trying to achieve. But I do it in the meeting with the stakeholders. So I share my screen. You could do it on any sort of virtual board. You could do it on Confluence. You could do it on Paint if you have to, on Word. But just ask those basic questions in the meeting. And then based on whatever environment or organization you're in, whether it's a product or a service, the first thing I try to do is see how close it is to something that we have. If it's an apple and we're trying to do oranges, the closest thing is that they're fruit. And then what are the differences? One's red or green, whatever colors apples come in, and one's an orange. So try to map it to something that's existing. And the reason I do that is that helps the stakeholders to think about something that maybe they forgot. It helps the developers and testers, who, by the way, I try to include in the meeting as well, because sometimes there may be a super technical question that I would overlook that a developer or a tester might consider, some sort of boundary for a field or something. And those are the things that I would do in that meeting. So one is ask the questions, the very high level questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then what is it closest to, and how is it similar or different? And then that sparks a whole lot of different questions. Also, if there's a project kickoff meeting with maybe the lead project manager or the project sponsors, there's normally a presentation that they share on whatever sort of technology. I try to add that into the meeting, and based on that, have a questions log. So before we go into the meeting, whatever questions the testers or developers or anybody in the team has, we try to pre-populate that so we can get through as many as we can as possible. Because sometimes, again, I may overlook a question. So that's the tools I use. I know not everyone has a Miro board license, but like I said, you could do it on Word or even PowerPoint.
Yeah, or like Teams has a built-in whiteboard, which is it's not as functional as Miro or Mural, but yeah. So fantastic, great. We'll try and just get another couple of really quick questions in before we close. The first one is from Rushma. Asks, I think, a really thought-provoking question, which is around keeping records of stakeholder analysis. Are there any privacy concerns? So there's like GDPR, I guess, Poppy, or in South Africa. I'd never really thought about that, but it's a good question. Well, I'd thought about it in the bigger sense, but in a project sense. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So what I do is I don't keep contact details. I just keep a name and a title, because if you're in the organization, I can find you if I type your name in on Teams or Slack or whatever email system we're using. But what I do with the stakeholder map is I share it with the people whose names are on it. So they know that I'm keeping that record, and I explain to them why I'm doing it. So when I'm having my initial one-on-ones, hi, I'm new to this team, I'm going to be working on this. Do you mind if I keep your name on my stakeholder register? And here's why I keep it. Most of the time people are cool with it, but I don't keep cell phone numbers. I don't keep email addresses. It's just a name. And more specifically, it's the role. because I
The
need to
role.
know that, yeah, the role and the department, because that name can change. It's the role and the department. So yeah,
Absolutely.
hopefully I'm not breaking any GDPR
I,
there, but
no, I think I think there's probably legitimate interest when you're within an organization and you're employed
yes,
with other. But it's a really great question, particularly if you're
yes.
working as a supplier and there's a. Yeah, that's a whole really interesting can of worms and a really interesting place for us to conclude the Q&A. If people haven't, if questions crop up, Christelle, are you happy for people to pop you a thing on LinkedIn and
Yes,
continue the.
yes, of course.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you once again, Christelle, for a really, really just an enthralling, a really interesting, thought-provoking session. So much to take away from there. My head is still spinning in a good way with ideas to try and things to take away. For those of you who are attending live, do stay on just for 2 more minutes because I've just got a couple of things to let you know about. First of all, and I'm going to put the link in the chat straight away to show you. There is a free, if you're not already aware of it, there is a free publication called BA Digest, and if you're not aware of it, I hope you'll take a look at it. I'm just going to share my screen now. If you go on that link, it will take you straight to it. But if you're watching the recording, if you just go on to blackmetric.com resources BA Digest, and read the current edition. You don't need to sign up. Literally, you can just download it or read it online. It is a free quarterly PDF about all things business analysis related, and there's lots of really interesting articles and stuff on various topics in there as well. So do take a look at that. Make the most of that resource while you're there. Also, of course, we have lots of regular webinars. The next webinar is on the 27th of March, in just under a month's time. It's at 6:30 p.m. UK time, and it's called Digital Product Management, an interactive panel session with Kevin Brennan, Sally Goodwin, and Philip Hendricks. You may be aware that they have just written a book on digital product management, and they've agreed to. I managed to convince them to do a panel session. So the sign up link is on there as well. If you signed up and opted in, you'll automatically get a copy of the recording to this session, so you can watch it back. And the final thing I wanted to just ask Christelle is, I believe you are, for people who want more of this, I believe you're presenting this session at a conference in Belgium. So when and where?
I am. I'm presenting this at the BA and Beyond conference, which takes place across Belgium and the Netherlands. So it's on the 22nd and 23rd of May in Belgium, and the 25th and 26th of May in the Netherlands. So you can check them out on LinkedIn. It's the BA and Beyond conference. So if you're in that area, or if you're willing to travel, please come and meet up. It will be great to chat together.
And a reminder from everyone in the UK, Belgium is a very handy Eurostar train ride away under the tunnel. So particularly if you're in London, you can be there really, really quickly. I've put the link to that conference in the URL as well. Great way of networking and seeing content like this in the real world, of course, which is is a different kettle of fish entirely. So we are now at time. So thank you very much, Christelle. Really, really great session. Thank you to everyone who has attended live or watched the recording. Stay safe, everyone. Hope to catch you again soon. So bye for now. Thanks again.